You know, they think the world is a horrible place. I'm quoting Donald Trump. So I have a totally optimistic message, really. I think healing is entirely possible. So if we're going to heal, if we're going to become whole, let's look at everything.
Side as a community watch, I'm doing a First Amendment audit, really big border patrol station.
Yoel Romero is a marvel of the mixed martial arts world. A perfect harmony between flexibility, huge muscle retention, fluidity, and explosiveness. Slow, lulling movement, Yoel patiently waits the timing to execute a spontaneous arsenal, and when he does, all we can do is marvel at his unrivaled athleticism.
He said the world is a horrible place. That's the world he lives in.
Here in the city of Murrieta.
In his own words, to leave your soul on the mat, he moves intuitively, a 40-year-old warrior in flow from his lifetime of training.
He lives in a world that's a horrible place. How would you like to live in a world that's a horrible place? Doesn't matter how many billions you have. Doesn't matter what powers you've accrued. How would you like to live in a world that's a horrible place?
Probably won't see no ground shots. At least I stay consistent though with my ground shots. Just a joke.
His fight IQ is brilliant, but it is an instinctive freestyle flow, all the same.
No. Why does he see it that way? Because he was a traumatized kid. His father was a rageaholic, demanding, demeaning, emotionally abusive person. His brother drank himself to death. Trump is a huge success who lives in a horrible world.
This makes Yoel very hard to read. His speed of explosiveness, plus the minimalism in his movements beforehand, they never really give a tell as to when he's about to pounce, until he does. Yoel Romero. He truly is a rare specimen indeed. Let's now take a closer glance at one of his recent matches.
Good, I don't wish to speak, man. I'm just doing a little story.
If you're going to put yourself in that area to work with people, you just have to accept that this is what happens. And your job is to help alleviate and, if possibly, prevent suffering.
Said I don't wish to speak, I'm just doing a little story.
There's no greater realm of suffering than the realm of hungry ghosts, which is that of addiction, where people are forever trying to fill this emptiness inside. And you meet interesting people. These are sensitive, interesting people whose tragedy is that their sensitivity was trampled on by the world.
Notice how Yoel always comes in very calm, slow, methodically, but like a big cat in brush waiting to pounce on prey. He explodes when he feels the timing is right.
Sorry for Hawk, for Wolf. For me. And that's all I don't need to explain myself.
Here, literally no emotion to the high kick whilst maintaining strong eye contact. I noticed this throughout the fight. Yoel simply had no emotion, continually pressuring forward. This truly gave Yoel this aura of invincibility, and you could tell it was affecting Luke's confidence. He felt a very real danger when standing before this big cat.
And how would our response be different if we actually went to the trouble of informing ourselves of what creates people like that and what has been our role in creating people like that? Addiction is not a choice that anybody makes. It's not a moral failure. It's not an ethical lapse. It's not a weakness of character. It's not a failure of will, which is how our society depicts addiction. Nor is it an inherited brain disease, which is how the medical tendency is to see it. What it actually is, it's a response to human suffering. And all these people that I worked with had been severely traumatized as children. All the women had been sexually abused. All the men had been traumatized, some of them sexually, physically, emotionally neglected. And not only is that my perspective, it's also what the scientific and research literature shows. So addiction then is actually, rather than being a disease as such or a human choice, it actually is, it's an attempt to escape suffering temporarily.
I found this really interesting, a question mark kick, perhaps influenced by his Taekwondo coach. Continually pressuring forward, this truly gave Yoel this aura of invincibility, and you could tell it was affecting Luke's confidence. He felt a very real danger when standing before this big cat.
Yeah.
Pictures of my facility.
It's not your facility, sir. Who do you work? Is that yours, or do you work for the public? Because it's being live streamed on internet too.
I don't care.
I know you don't care. You walk up on me like a thug.
The media, the television, cultural depiction of addicts is usually as desperate people, but without showing why they're desperate. So all that shows is the desperation for the drugs. There's no indication of what's driving that desperation. And hence you see them behaving in all kinds of dysfunctional ways. Aggressive or manipulative or unpleasant.
Yoel, even at the age of 40, is still always trying to learn and grow, expand his arsenal. Perhaps this is a secret to his vitality, but obviously also a reason as to why he's so effective in the arena.
What's your name and badge number, sir? Look at these guys, won't even identify yourself. What's your name and badge number?
I know you from somewhere.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
Do you?
remember we had a PD a while ago, no?
Maybe?
Yeah, he was with somebody else. Yeah.
Is that why you walked up with me
So
like that?
how can we help you?
I didn't ask you for help, you're dismissed.
If you're asking, is it possible for people to heal from trauma sufficiently that they don't have to keep escaping into addictions to lessen the suffering of their trauma? Yes, that's entirely possible. But the question is, under what conditions is that possible?
You're not my commander, so how can I help
You're
you?
not, I don't have to answer to you.
Okay, so then why are you here?
I don't have to answer
You're not a
to you.
terrorist, are you?
Are you?
If we do notice the kick though, it's not something he's mastered yet. It's not fluid, which also glints insight into his mentality.
And under the conditions that obtain in London, UK, or Vancouver, British Columbia, or New York, or any place, under the conditions that obtain socially, legally, and from the perspective of medical practice, it's hardly a likelihood, because we're approaching it from the wrong direction and with the wrong perspective.
His overall technique has always been a little more on the unrefined side, compensating for the missing details in technique with sheer, explosive athleticism. This tells us why he has such a vast arsenal. He'll do anything in the moment so as long as it feels right to do so. If he feels the opening, it doesn't have to be perfect, but he will try to bring it in.
Are you?
Are you?
You look like a terrorist right
You
now.
look like a terrorist too.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think you're just a dumbass. Look at this guy, guys. This is what our tax dollars pays for. Bunch of clowns.
So, I mean, addictions are like everything else on a spectrum. So a lot of people do heal from addictions, but the most inveterate, most entrenched addicts, they have the hardest time. And they're also the ones whom society gives the hardest time, so that it makes it even harder to help them. Never mind they don't get the help they need, they actually get actively punished. And so what you've actually got is traumatized children. When children are traumatized, that affects how they feel about themselves, which is deeply ashamed. Because a child always believes that it's about himself. So if I'm being hurt like this, I gotta be a terrible person. Or if I was sexually abused, why didn't I fight back? I must be a very weak person. So there's a deep sense of shame.
No, I'm not dismissed. You don't tell me. You don't give me orders.
Oh, okay, but yeah, I don't have to answer you either. So
Okay, just as long as you're not here to blow it up.
Yoel's jab comes in, engages the distance, flush against nose, momentarily impairing vision.
Then there's tremendous emotional pain that accrues from abuse and neglect. Tremendous emotional pain that is hardly possible for people to bear. Now they have to soothe their pain with substances or other compulsive behaviors.
have you killed anybody this week, sir? Or have you beat anybody up at the border?
Yeah.
Luke sees the follow-up and attempts to put everything he has into a check hook. With this, he hopes to counter Yoel's advance, but notice, as he slips to the outside of the jab, his eyes are no longer on his opponent. He cannot see Yoel's follow-up.
Do you have any internal, and I don't work for the border, have you any internal affairs investigations on you? You look like you're pretty high-strung there, bro. Steroids? What is it, juice?
It's called, let me see, bananas.
No, it's called a badge.
Now this is where things get really crazy. The purpose of a check hook is to counter an aggressive advance, but Yoel's level of explosiveness, it doesn't just compensate for his own technique. It doesn't even just compensate for injury. Here, we see him blasting past even his opponent's technique. Yoel, he beat to the punch, a punch that's supposed to beat you to the punch. Look!
Then the trauma itself, given that the human brain develops in interaction with the environment, shapes the brain circuitry in such a way that the person will be more likely to find relief from the drugs. So the very physiology of the brain is affected by early trauma. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of taking traumatized people and then re-traumatizing them, and then hoping at the same time, why don't they listen? Why don't they get better already? Why don't they give it up? Well, they don't give it up because the more hurt they are, the more they need to escape. So addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary pleasure or relief in, but then experiences negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up.
Ever since like the 4th grade, hey, ever since like the 4th grade, when they give somebody, they create somebody a hall monitor, they get this complex right here, look at.
Okay, fair enough. In other words, the addiction provided pain relief for you, temporarily. Now, as a spiritual teacher said, addictions all begin in pain and they end in pain. But we're talking about the beginnings now. In other words, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem was that you had a lot of emotional pain you didn't know what to do with. So the addiction was really an attempt to solve a problem. So when you say, why do people use substances or why do they engage in addictions in general, it's because they have a problem they don't know what to do with. And if you really understand their addiction, like with yourself, we have to ask, well, what gave you so much emotional pain? And how come you didn't have the internal resources? This is not a judgment, it's simply an inquiry. How come you lacked at some point the internal resources to deal with that pain in a more creative, forward-looking way that would help you resolve the pain rather than to perpetuate it?
That don't matter, I don't, thank you, suck it easy.
Luke's lead has a shorter distance to travel, but Yoel, his backhand exploded in first. As you can see by where their arms cross, Yoel's hand was the first to enter, and as this monster smashes in, the lights just go out.
So really what it was is that the addiction came along to help you solve a problem you had no other solutions for at the time. And that's the case for all addictions. So why do people use, why do people engage in addictions? Because they have deep emotional problems they don't have the means to resolve on their own. That's why they use. So that I'm saying that we're living in a society that denies pain. Stiff upper lip and all that.
All right, as long as you're not here to kill anybody.
To deal with that, we'd have to look at ourselves and say, well, what kind of society are we that engenders so much pain in vulnerable people and then punishes them for that desperation to escape from their pain? So those questions that pertain to addictions actually involve the very nature of the society that we live in, and what we value, and what we reward, and what we ostracize. These are hard questions. I'm saying they're genuinely hard questions. And so it's easier not to look at them.
There's a walk of shame, guys.
I don't hear too much negative feedback. What mostly happens with this perspective is that it's not covered in the mainstream media. They don't want to hear about trauma and pain.
You see that one jerk walk up to me like that?
I believe this match was exactly the kind of excitement any true fight fan would have wanted. It's high risk, intense, emotional, yet a genuine display of elite skill from both men. Truly, this was a privilege worth every penny. Yoel, on the other hand, not only does he look like a hero from a comic book, he moves like one too. Literally, you can stand this guy next to an action figure and they look proportionally exaggerated the same way. Truly, the best in the world is housed in this arena. I cannot be any more grateful for the privilege to watch. Thank you.
I'm talking about terrorism, broadly speaking. If you look at the areas of the world where the terrorism emanates from, how many hundreds of thousands of them have been killed by Western bombs? Going back to the 1910s and the 8 million Congolese that were killed by the Belgians, do we even know about it?
Just because I'm by myself?
You know, the tens of thousands and by now hundreds of thousands of Arabs who've been killed by Western arms in their own countries.
To think anyone who possesses all of these elements could be so humble, on top of having a relentless drive to win. Yoel, he holds nothing but love and compassion for every one of his competitors, even when they do not hold the same for him. They can say or do anything, even beat him, and he'll still be nothing but grateful and compassionate from the bottom of his heart.
You guys have a wonderful day.
not saying that therefore we justify terrorism or we don't protect against it. Are we really interested in understanding the source of it? Or do we just want to be victims?
All right. Okay, that's all they could do is take pictures and fucking go away like with their tails tucked. Bye, bye. Bye, shorty.